Ruth Callahan got $62 a month in 1944, which was the death benefit, 2 kids, and a rented 2-room apartment on Rutland Street in Pittsburgh after her husband was killed in the Pacific. Rent took $22 and food took $18, leaving $20 to keep 3 people alive and build a cushion against disaster without ever asking a neighbor for money. She ran that math for 9 years without missing rent once. Both children graduated, and nobody on the block understood how the house stayed standing. The system started with a small notebook she kept beside the OPA ration book on the kitchen table. What looked like a housekeeping notebook was actually 12 rules running quietly behind the walls. Number 12. The ration book ledger. Tuesday nights, under a single overhead bulb, Ruth opened the notebook beside the OPA ration book and tracked not just stamps remaining, but which neighbors had surplus points to trade. Beef carried some of the highest point costs of any rationed item, sometimes requiring 8 points or more per pound, while canned vegetables cost only a fraction. So when meat was unavailable at the butcher anyway, she traded her meat coupon to the neighbor upstairs for 2 weeks of canned goods points and came out ahead. Careful stamp management and neighbor trading saved her roughly $2 to $3 a month in grocery costs, which on her budget was not a rounding error. 75% of wartime housewives managed ration books alongside cash, but most treated it as a chore. Ruth treated it as arithmetic, running a 2-currency household budget without a single tool designed to help her do it. Number 11. The envelopes on the back wall. Every first of the month, Ruth counted the incoming benefit cash and divided it before anything else happened. 3 envelopes sat on the kitchen table: rent, food, and the back wall, which was her term for the $20 she kept physically separated from everything spendable. Rent went in first, food second, and nothing moved between envelopes once loaded. The cash envelope system appeared in government wartime pamphlets throughout the 1940s as the recommended household management method, but most women used it loosely. Ruth used it like a rule with no exceptions, and every child in that kitchen knew the order without being told twice. The bank never saw that $20, and it never needed to. Number 10. The grease tin by the stove. A smaller tin sat beside the burner every morning after cooking, collecting bacon drippings and meat fat that Ruth strained and stored as a cooking oil substitute across the following days. When the fat accumulated past what the household could use, the surplus went into the OP, a salvage collection can for the wartime munitions drive, because the government had printed the instruction directly on ration books: salvage the tin cans and waste fats. A pound of lard cost roughly 24 cents with stamps in 1944, and her grease collection replaced 1 to 2 pounds per month, eliminating that purchase from the food envelope entirely. The government called it patriotism. Ruth called it breakfast. Number 9. The garden in the lot. 3 doors down on Rutland Street, a vacant lot became a working pantry in spring 1944. Ruth split the plot with 2 other war wives, each growing different crops without duplicating effort, and her canning operation ran from August through October, preserving the entire harvest into the household's winter supply. A January 1944 poll found that 75% of wartime housewives canned an average of 165 jars per year, and by the end of 1943, Victory Gardens supplied 40% of civilian vegetable needs nationally. Ruth's garden replaced $6 to $8 per month in grocery spending during summer and fall, meaning more than a third of her food budget cost nothing during those months. The government called it a wartime contribution. The children called it dinner. Number 8. The boarder on the second floor. The small back room had been a storage room until Ruth cleared it in spring 1944 and put a cot, a window, and a hook on the door inside it. A female defense worker from a nearby Westinghouse plant took the room for $8 a month. Cash, first of the month. The wartime housing shortage was severe across industrial cities, with defense workers flooding Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Baltimore looking for rooms near plant sites, putting widows with spare space in an unexpectedly strong position. $8 a month was a 13% increase over her death benefit, and over 12 months, that was $96, nearly 5 months of back-wall savings running in parallel. The room was earned before she had finished clearing it out. Here is the number worth pausing on. Ruth's combined effective income by late 1944, the death benefit plus the boarder, plus the garden savings, totaled roughly $77 a month. A household today earning $5,000 and carrying $4,800 in fixed obligations has less actual margin than Ruth had on 77. She made less money and kept more of it, and the difference was not luck. Number 7. The children's envelopes. Saturday mornings in 1945, 2 envelopes sat on the kitchen table beside a third in the center. Ruth gave each child a small amount from the week's food surplus, never more than 25 cents, with one rule stated once: half you spend, half you save, and the saved half went into the family envelope, which was not touched unless all 3 agreed. At 25 cents per child per week, the family envelope accumulated roughly $1 per month, small in dollars but enormous in training, because Ruth was not teaching arithmetic. She was building the only financial institution that charges no fees and never closes, and the older child did the same thing with her own children 30 years later, without remembering where she had learned it. Number 6. The make-do. Monday. Before the children woke on Monday mornings, a sewing basket sat on the kitchen table beside whatever had broken or torn over the previous week. A sock heel, a coat button, a sheet corner, a shoe sole worn through. Each item was assessed before anything else happened, and almost everything was repaired. New children's shoes cost $3.50 to $5 in 1944 with ration points, so extending the life of one pair by 3 months saved the purchase and preserved the points for something that could not be fixed with thread and leather. The children did not want to wear the patched things to school, and Ruth did not need their approval to keep the $3.50 in the envelope. Number 5. The soup bone calendar. The butcher on Carson Street gave Ruth the soup bones for almost nothing, because almost nobody else was asking for them, and she treated each one like a 3-day calendar. One bone slow cooked on Monday became bone broth, which became vegetable soup on Tuesday using garden canned stock, which became a thickened stew on Wednesday with whatever produce remained. During peak garden months, her combined use of unrationed bones, home canned vegetables, and protein substitutes like cottage cheese which cost 21 cents per pound against 40 to 60 cents for rationed beef, brought her weekly food cost for 3 people to under $4 against an $18 monthly budget. Wartime USDA pamphlets published multi-use bone cooking methods, and most households abandoned the practice within 5 years of the war's end. Modern American households discard roughly 30% of purchased food. Ruth's soup bone calendar, grease collection, and garden canning eliminated virtually all food waste, not for any environmental reason, but because her $20 margin could not absorb loss. Waste became a luxury she could not afford to adopt, and her grandchildren adopted it without noticing. Number 4. The War Bond Drawer. Whenever the back wall envelope exceeded its $20 target by more than $5, Ruth walked to the post office and bought a Series E war bond for $18.75, redeemable at $25 after 10 years. She did not buy bonds because she understood compound returns, but because cashing one required a deliberate trip to the post office, which meant she could not spend the money on a tired afternoon or a moment of want. War bonds were the primary savings mechanism for low-income households across the 1940s, with the friction of redemption being, for many women, the feature rather than the flaw. Over 4 years, one bond every 2 to 3 months accumulated $150 to $200 in face value, and when redeemed in the mid-1950s, it contributed directly to the older child's first year of college. Number 3. The Neighbor. Watch. 3 afternoons a week from 1944 through 1946, 5 or 6 children occupied Ruth's front room, while 2 neighbors worked defense plant shifts, and each neighbor contributed $2 to $3 per week in cash. $4 to $6 per week was invisible to any government form, unreported and uncounted against her benefit calculations. And over a full year, it added $200 to $300 to the household, more than 4 months of her official death benefit. Informal child-watching exchanges among war wives were documented repeatedly across wartime oral history projects as a widespread practice in working-class neighborhoods, running on reciprocal obligation rather than charity, which was a distinction that mattered enormously to women who had refused to be seen as dependent. She sold the only thing that could not be rationed, and nobody thought to put an OPA ceiling on it. Number 2, the shame she wouldn't spend. Ruth kept a mental list of things she refused to buy, regardless of whether she could technically afford them. New curtains when the old ones still hung, restaurant meals when the stove worked, store-bought cake when flour was in the cabinet, new shoes when the current pair still accepted a patch. Every dollar not spent on appearances stayed in the back wall envelope. Children who grew up in households like Ruth's later replaced the curtains, bought the cake, and financed the appearance of comfort while carrying debt, because the post-war generation associated those wartime habits with poverty rather than with the security those habits had built. Ruth knew exactly how the street saw her and decided the street's opinion was not a line item in her budget. The curtains stayed up for 11 years, and so did the family. Ruth's effective savings rate on her available monthly margin ran roughly 20 to 25%, while the modern American household savings rate has averaged 3 to 8% in most years since 2000. She did not have a savings rate. She had a wall with a name, and nothing crossed it without a survival reason. Number 1, the house paid for by things never bought. In 1953, Ruth signed the deed on the row house she had been renting for 9 years. Her $62 monthly death benefit across those 9 years totaled roughly $6,700, which fell short of what even a working-class row house required by the early 1950s. So the house was paid for by the difference: the boarder's rent, the neighbor watch income, the bond redemptions, the garden savings, and 9 years of things she refused to purchase. The gap she defended every month became the down payment, and she bought the house at 41 alone on a benefit that never significantly increased. The notebook, its pages stiff and the last ration stamps long expired, moved from the rented kitchen table to the drawer beside the new stove. One of her children finds the notebook in the early 1970s while clearing the kitchen drawer. The last entry is still legible. Nobody knows which neighbor the final trade was with, and nobody knows what rule to apply to it anymore. The system that built the house is sitting in a drawer, and the family living inside it has no idea how it got there. The notebook never made money. It just refused to lose any, and for 9 years, that was enough.